Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon and welcome to your Tuesday City Council informational meeting. Today is Tuesday, March 12th. I'll call this meeting to order. Our first item of business is the Metro Management Council update. That was from Wednesday, March 6th. Councillor Kiley and I attended that. Councillor Kiley has the update.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I provided each of you with handouts based on what took place at the meeting. This past Wednesday, March 6th. First of all, we reviewed, as I had reported the last time, we wanted to answer a few questions before we proceeded much further into the hiring process of a new director. And so we had convened small groups to tackle some of those questions, one being, does the current structure work? And the answer, as you can see in front of you, the collaborative guidance from both the county and city perspective that it does work. Potential for future partnerships do exist beyond one county. No major cost savings by changing the current structure. Governance, the current governance is working. Don't make changes due to operational issues. And no immediate need to change the structure. So then if you turn to your next page, further questions, what services are being provided by the county and the city, and are there shortfalls in business support services, and are there other services that should be provided? And the answers to those questions, there are services being provided by the county and the city. More services can and should be provided by the county and the city. Need to identify which services will be provided by each entity, and to develop ownership culture by the county and the city in joint entity. And so then you'll see a flow chart based on that discussion of who provides what services. A flow chart was created to better identify who's in charge of what area when questions do arise. So that's obviously provided to us as a board, as well as the members of our Metro 911 service team. And then, so the review long-term agency needs, the staffing. We're now on board with a new director position. In fact, we'll be proceeding with identifying the individuals that will be interviewed. We have received very good and qualified individuals for the position. And I'll talk about that just a little bit more in a second. We'll continue to review staffing structure and needs, and continue to review the wage and benefit structure as well too, in an effort to make sure that we're attracting the best and then retaining the best as well. And the capital, review long-term space needs, and that would include our primary public safety answering point, or our PSAP, which is currently located in the old jail, which is owned by the county, and as well as looking into our backup site as well, which is located at 37th in Minnesota in fire headquarters. So the first phase of the recruitment process was obviously to publicize the open position, and Bill O'Toole and Carrie Deaver with Human Resources have identified good candidates, and it'll move into
other than to introduce myself and let my face be known and share a little bit of information with you.
Thank you, Kyle. It's nice. Kyle, sorry, that was way before Chris. I'm sorry. Two ago. I'm sorry. Thank you, Chris. I used to work with Kyle, that's why. Before I turn it over to the council, I just want to let everyone know that the video, is it working now? Okay. The video was not working for a brief moment, but it is being recorded. IT was looking into it, so we're good to go again. Any questions or comments? Councillor Selberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, welcome, Chris. Remind me, am I remembering correctly, and I might not be, but the process each county follows to come up with values, did that vary a little bit in years past? And if so, does it still, or did we got that closer together now?
It probably varied. You know, I Again, I don't know the history down here other than we are on two separate valuation systems, two different cost tables. You're on Vanguard, right? Yeah. So by state law, they adopted and allowed, otherwise in the past it was Marshall and Swift was the only cost service that any county in the state of South Dakota could utilize. Vanguard came in and kind of petitioned the state to say, hey, we've got a great product, we want to be able to market it in your state, can we? And they approved it. So with that came a computer-assisted mass appraisal program, similar to what we use here in Minnehaha. They're Vanguard, we're ProVal. The purpose is the same, the methodology to get there is a little bit different. It might look at different things, value things a little differently at the core. But once we get a cost to build a structure out of either system, that's really the irrelevant part, the cost to build, which Carla mentioned, we got to look at cost, market, and income. Everything gets costed. Well, it get costed here and it get costed here. Are they the same? Maybe, maybe not. That cost then gets looked at how like properties sell, and it gets adjusted from there to the market. So that level of assessment then can be different. I like to, my past in Brookings and down here, I would like to be at about 92 to 94% of market. That's where I'd like to be. Some directors I know want to be at 100. Some want to be at 88. We can be anywhere between 85 and 100. When it gets to the taxable factor or that your tax notice, that equalized value that you see there, that's where that gets picked up to make us equal. If I assess at 100% of value and say a $100,000 building is worth $100,000, I'll get taxed at 85% of that, meaning you'll pay tax at $85,000. If Carla assesses the same building, but says, I only want to assess at $85,000, because of her level of assessment being 85, she's taxed at 100%, so the taxable is $85,000. So we're valued here, we're equalized to exactly the same.
Okay. So 6 to 8%, I think you say will be the average increase in Minnehaha. What did you say it will be for Lincoln again, Carla?
Well, the map indicated there were spotty adjustments from 2 to 10%. Now, that's not always the case in our reappraisal areas. Our reappraisal areas are those areas that we go door to door to door on. So some of those valuations could increase 20, 30, 40%, depending on if there were any improvements, updates from the last time we did an appraisal on that property. So what we find out over not going out and reviewing properties in a timely manner, properties have had updates, finished their basements, so that's why an assessment would go up to, you know, a 30% increase. Now, on the flop side, it could decrease as well. We saw some decreases after we were there during a reappraisal. So that's probably the biggest difference between Minnehaha and Lincoln, because Chris was exactly right. We have the same methodology, but we're going door to door. So a lot of our data characteristics have changed from the last time we were there, maybe 20 years ago. So that's why assessments in Lincoln County seem to go up at a higher rate.
And wasn't the goal in Lincoln too, and again, I may be wrong, but if I'm remembering correctly, to get closer to 100% on values of everything, where I think you were saying 85 to 100 over here, isn't Lincoln the last few years been, let's get it as close as we can to 100?
My initial, when I presented the reappraisal plan to the county commission, which I have a couple in attendance today, my initial goal, I wanted to be about 93 to 95% of market. Well, it's kind of an unrealistic thing in your bigger counties because we have so many variables. I've actually backed my assessment goal down to 92%. I didn't even reach that this year by making all those adjustments. I think we ended up at 90.7%. So what happens on the taxation side is we'll take that 90.7% that is an assessment level and bring it down to an 85% taxable level. And that factor comes from Peer after they give us, or we give them all of our analysis. So we start out on a clean slate. It's our sales versus our assessments. And then we take that information and we say, okay, we're gonna raise 5% here and 10% there, and then we run our data set again, and it gives us our new level of assessment. It's called our intentions, it's verbiage that we probably speak, but, so to answer your question, my initial goal was 93 to 95%. Last year I was at 91.7. This year I dropped down to 90.7. I mean, the market is hard to stay on top of it. You know, we're just trying to stay equal with it at this point, because I'm having a hard time seeing that I don't want to be assessing at the very top of the bubble. Because right now I truly believe Sioux Falls is in this bubble. I mean, prices are extremely high. And to be at 94% right now, and something would happen, I probably would have to decrease values. So I'm very comfortable with our 90 to 91% range that we're at. I'm not sure where you ended up.
We ended up, again, I said my goal is always to be about 92 to 94. We ended up just over 90. We started at 88. All of our corrections got us to about 90, and our taxable factor should be about 94. So we're basically about break even with what we were last year. So, which is, on the flip side of things, if you happen to be a neighborhood where your value didn't go up or didn't go down and you stayed the same, at least your equalized then stays the same. You know, if we do swings up or down on that taxable factor, then your value could not change for assessment, but your equalized could. And then you go, well, what the heck is going on? Why did my taxable value go up? My assessment didn't change. Well, it's because we didn't get as close to the bullseye this year. We got farther, so it needs to be adjusted. Yeah. If we get closer, it gets adjusted down. If we get farther away, it gets adjusted up. So that number is always a moving target. So there's some stability and some good practices if you don't necessarily shoot for a goal, but shoot to stay where you were, because then that equalization factor will stay there too. And that's just another rung down the ladder to consider.
Yeah, I was just going to say that before you said it. It's definitely a moving target. So, but it's interesting to hear again kind of how you're coming at it. So the only thing I'd add is I do like that floor plan sketch that you added. That'll help a lot. Obviously, the more info and the bigger picture we see as we look at that, the better. So thank you.
Councilor Staley.
First of all, welcome, Chris. And I loved working with Diane. I think you've got a great staff there. I think it's very citizen-friendly, Minnehaha County. So I hope you will grasp that energy and build upon that. And I'm hoping, and I know there was a difference in approaches, and we're going to see that when we're sitting there this next week about how each one is done. I would ask Carla if you would continue to give me the materials you did beforehand. I found that to be very helpful. And I'm going to take this as our opportunity to just ask a few questions, because I don't think we're going to have that time when we get in there. Now, one thing that I wanted to find out is if people, and I just put it on Facebook that Thursday is the deadline, just in case people aren't aware of that, how do they contact you if they want to protest their assessment? What are they going to call somebody?
Well, we once again have a couple different approaches here, because by verbiage, it states that they are to contact the clerk of their local board.
Perfected in writing.
Through written notice.
Okay.
So the clerk.
Today's Tuesday. So
the clerk of the local board for Lincoln County is the city of Sioux Falls clerks.
At the Minnehaha County, the city, like our Tom Greco here? Yes. Oh, okay.
You're the local board. You guys are the local board.
Okay, so
the clerk is Tom and staff.
So if you had their number, they could call for information if they needed to.
Absolutely.
And that's for both counties? Okay, so that's for Minnehaha County.
Yeah, for ours then.
Okay.
They contact you, the clerk.
The clerk contacts
Monica's
me.
the clerk.
Monica, okay. So yeah, for me, the written notice can come into me. One thing with the written notice, it does have to be perfected in writing, whether it be the PT-17 or a letter. There's
well, I think the first step might be for somebody to just have somebody to call.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
You know, because I'm not going to be telling. So I heard you say that our city clerk's office is going to be the go-to for Minnehaha County or for Lincoln? And then where do they, and for Minnehaha, they go to, what,
Yeah.
To my office.
what's that phone number?
Oh, gosh. Now you're putting me on the spot. I haven't been there long enough. I never called myself yet. 347. No, excuse me. 367-4220.
4220 is Minnehaha. Okay, great. So second question, I know that when we were doing, we had a parcel, a developer came in with like 10 parcels. And he had purchased it for, I'm going to say each parcel, bare land for $60,000. And then the assessment came in at $80,000. And he came into us with this group of pieces of property, and there was something said that you have within a certain amount of time, you cannot charge more for the assessment than what someone paid for it. Was that a 6-month thing? Because we were talking about that in the midst of this. And we lowered his assessment down to the $60,000 per parcel. Do you, I mean, is there some kind of format that you pay something and they can't raise the assessment like a month later more than you?
Keep in mind that we are mass appraisers. We are valuing properties.
Microphone.
At Mr. Councilmember Starr and Staley and so
Right.
all exactly the same. We come up with our models, our price per square foot, and we're going to value you the same. A sale could come in and someone purchased it for $80,000, and then someone could come in and purchase it for $40,000. We take a look at all the sales and we come up with our middle number, which is our median, and then we assess it accordingly. So the folks that you typically hear from are those folks that paid the $40,000. You're not going to hear from the $80,000 folks. It's just the ones that paid less.
Right, but there was something about this particular thing where he paid market value for the $60,000 per piece of vacant land. He had done no improvements in it, and like four to 6 months later.
You're probably getting to is, does he have a right to appeal? I would say absolutely.
Yes, but
absolutely.
I thought, okay, I just thought there was some
But
rule in
there
place.
is no time, so you as a local board then, if you adjusted his value back down to sale price, that's your decision. We're required by law to extend that decision. That becomes the assessed value then for 19 paid 20. Does it have to stay there? Next year, 2020 paid 21 is a new year. It's a new market year. It's no different than if you bought a car on the lot, it's worth this, I drive it off. What's the value of that?
Worth
2
less.
blocks away.
It's worth less then, yes,
It's a
right.
different car than what was sitting there.
Right.
Next year is a whole new assessment year against whole new statistics, against whole new volume of sales.
Right, okay. So then, I know Counselor Erickson brought this up 2 years ago. We were talking about drainage ditches, and if there's some drainage ditch on your property that has less of a value than.
Yes, you're right. I wrote that down, the
always-
drainage value, because you and I sat on the board at the same time. Minnehaha County and Lincoln County did it different. We looked at the Tut Hill area, and some of those assessments came in from Minnehaha County, like, really, really high. And the person that came in to attest them said, hey, this is drainage, and showed us pictures, and literally it was a culvert with drainage. I think Councilor Knights, you might have been there too. But then when we looked on Lincoln County, drainage was not assessed the exact same way, and it was really different, and we've had kind of this debacle over drainage value as far as, I mean, because if you look in that Tut Hill area over there and assess that at what a lot would sell, I mean, you're looking at $1 million for a lot, easy, versus the drainage is $22,000. We're talking some really big differences.
Talking drainage fees? Or
No, it's the assessment on the land and whether it's deemed drainage or developable land, I think, maybe. I don't know. Did I explain that right?
I guess I'll address that as they come. Right now, I haven't been here long enough to look at that. If there is a drainage area, a low area of a neighborhood or something, depending on how many sales we have in that area, that should start calling itself out. It should start self-identifying. You know, you've got a 10-block neighborhood and 2 blocks is low and floods all the time. I would hopefully, if those sell, which they will sell, for what amount, Your ones that don't flood are going to sell for this, and the ones that do flood are going to sell for this. And our job then is to look at those and analyze those sales and find those breakpoints, those deviations. I can't speak if that was done in the past or
Right.
not.
And really in that area, they were like a sliver that you couldn't probably even put a shed on it. I think somebody put a basketball court on it, and somebody else did. I mean, it was like between two homes because they needed the drainage. And so the land was developed, but there was no way to put even a mobile home.
It sounds to me like something just got missed.
Yeah.
But, I'm bringing it up because Counselor Erickson knew, she had the knowledge about how to address that, and because of her injection into that, it got a better result for the citizen, whereas a lot of us wouldn't have even known that that was something to do.
And it just happened to be that I was on the Minnehaha County and then Lincoln County, so it was by chance that I happened to know it. It was nothing I really knew.
So I thought, I thought it was a positive. I wanted to kind of grab onto that.
I can tell you from experience with working with the two previous directors before Chris, we don't call each other up and say, what are you going to put on your drainage? I mean, we don't do that. We have a standard in Lincoln County, and they're going to have a standard in Minnehaha, and, you know, hopefully we're not that far off. You know, we might put a price per acre on those drainage ditches, and he might put a
Price per square foot.
price per square foot, and it's just, we don't.
Well, however you do it, we just want people treated fairly. And then the last thing I wanted to say is, you brought it up, Carla, but, you know, we're in a bubble and things are going up. So if the housing market does start to have a correction, as several realtors have been mentioning, they see in the future, the near future, is that then are we going to come back and have a reassessment? Are we going to be lowering the assessments? And he's saying yes. And I mean, that to me,
if that's what the market, if the sale prices start falling below the assessed, you'll see, instead of going up 6% in this neighborhood, you might see a 6% reduction in the taxable. Our job is to assess property fair and equal. That is our goal. After that, it really falls back to the taxes. That's the purpose of it. My job is to make sure that your house, if it's worth more, is assessed more. And if it's worth less than his, it's assessed less. That's our job.
right.
When it comes to the taxes then, your budgets decide those taxes. So if I always use Bruce. I'm going to go back to my old county, Bruce Town. If they need $10 per thousand to fund this budget, if I doubled the whole town of Bruce's value and I took it up and they don't need any more money for that budget, that levy reduces to 5. You get the same amount of taxes. Did I change their taxes? No. Did I double their value? Yes. On the same token, if I cut everything in half and their budget remains the same, then the dollars per thousand or that levy needs to double to compensate for that, to come up with that money. So we will always be tracking that market, whether it be going up or whether it be going down. That's our job, is to make sure it's fair and equal. After that, then that total value of that taxing district gets divided out into your budgets, thus the levies. You're going to get your money whether we raise values or lower values.
And Carla and I had this discussion, and Diane, when we first started, and we talked about, do you want a bigger budget? This is all about more money for us. And I'm saying, well, I'd like to maybe cut the budget a little bit and let people's property assessments and throughout that, their property tax value to go down. I think people would really like that, so that we say we're using our money more effectively here. And I'm not interested in sucking more money out of people for a bigger budget, personally. I'm into using it more effectively, what we have, so.
I agree. I'm a taxpayer as well.
Councilor Neitzer.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the thing because this is very complicated to the average person. And so whenever people see assessments, they see 15%, let's say it's going up, and the first thing they may jump to is, oh my gosh, my property tax is going up 15%, but there's zero correlation necessarily. If everybody in the county, if you reassess everybody 15% across the entire county, presumably nothing changes.
That is correct.
So
that
it's just
grows, it gets divided back out to everybody. Nobody changes tax dollars.
Sure, and it's totally understandable. I'm not picking on anybody for it because it's complicated, but I think that's.
You're exactly right. The taxpayer sees, oh my gosh, my assessment notice went up 15%. My taxes are going up 15%. Last year, my taxes were $3,000. Now they're going to be $4,200. Uh-oh. It never shakes out that way.
Exactly. So when you say you equalize, I presume you, and this is, and I get the idea of wanting, like if, you know, if I happen to live below 57th Street versus above, that in a perfect world, we'd all be the same, you know, equal or value the same. But I presume when you equalize, you're equalizing just inside of your county. You're not reaching over to Lincoln or Moody County to see what they're doing, or?
That is somewhat correct. That equalization factor, so what it does, the state revenue does that. And the main purpose of that, I guess I never considered city taxes, but the main purpose of that equalizing is overlapping school districts that cross county lines. So if one assessor in Minnehaha is assessing at 85%, and Carla's in Lincoln assessing at 100, we've got a disparity. So they take our level of assessment at the end of the year and they divide 85 by that to get that taxable factor. And again, the closer, if I'm at 100%, you're going to pay tax at 85% of value, and if I assess at 85% of value, then you're going to pay tax on 100% of assessment. And it washes out. So the closer we are to 100%, and that's why we both had commented that we want to stay in that 92-ish, 94 range, it's to soften that edge. Because if I assess at 100%, meaning if you had a $100,000 house, your tax notice would say you're taxed at $85,000. If I assessed at 85% and you had a $100,000 house, you're going to pay tax on $100,000 because it's one and the same. So that's what the equalizing does. And the original function of that was to make sure that people doing the same job but doing it differently across taxing districts, but within one school district boundary, that even though the buildings were assessed differently, they were taxed basically the same.
Makes sense. Okay. And I'm going to help real quick, I think maybe on the drainage thing. And I can't speak for counties and how other cities do it, but here in the city of Sioux Falls, if there's something that, you know, somebody builds a subdivision, we have certain areas that are public drainage ways, but there's a lot of that are private. And they will zone them conservation. So if you look at the zoning, and I don't remember whether you take any regard to what a property is zoned, but you know, they'll leave out a part of the subdivision. It will be zone conservation. You can't put anything on it, and everybody knows that it's just a detention pond. That's all it's ever going to be. And that's what the questions were related to, is how you value detention.
I'll have to look into those down here from my perspective. I don't know.
We have $1,000 an acre.
But I've had the same things in Brookings County. I basically put them down to a wasteland value. I can't remember, depending on how big. A lot of them said, the reality is you have to, because if they're privately owned and you assess them and you tax them, eventually they're going to say, I'm not paying the taxes. And then they will eventually be taken by tax deed. And I can tell you the county probably doesn't want them either. So you need to work with them. There is no value. There's a nominal value. I mean, there's always some value, but it's a minuscule part. And I've adjusted them in Brookings. I just can't speak to if that's been done here or has been carried forward in Minnehaha yet. But if it hasn't, it will be.
It's funny you mentioned. I have one more question, and then I'll defer because I have some others. But it's funny you mentioned that, because I think that I've heard at some point sometimes people stop paying taxes on them. Let the county or the city own them because they have no value and they don't want to pay taxes on them, and then they end up being a public drainage easement because, you know.
I'm sure the city of Sioux Falls doesn't want to take those and take the maintenance fees and all of that with that. So
it's happened. Market adjustments. When you do a market adjustment, what is the boundary? Do you do like in a whole subdivision? You know, like if you just say everybody's going up 15%, what's the geographic area that you're going to stick to for either county?
Area, we consider them neighborhoods, so it'd be 2 or 3 subdivisions could be considered a neighborhood. Sometimes a subdivision is their own neighborhood because they're all the same type of home. They you know, northern tier is 57th, Louise, you know, they share the same borders. So we do kind of a blend. Some of our neighborhoods might have 2 or 3 subdivisions located with them if they're like properties. But some neighborhoods are their own individual neighborhoods.
So
some of our subdivisions are their own neighborhoods.
So you're looking case by case of the attributes of the properties. It's not just simply I'm just going to take this subdivision. It depends, but okay.
No, there's no template for it.
Okay.
Any other questions, Councilor Starr?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Carla, take me through, I don't remember in the couple of years that I've done this, that we've ever gone through an income-based appeal? Because don't you keep most of that private anyway when they turn over their numbers for the commercial property? Is it ever get to the point where, I mean, it seems like that's a little more cut and dried of what the income that you wouldn't necessarily have an appeal? Do you remember any appeals from the income-based process?
We left our income information for our county board because you're right. Once we present that as our presentation, it's open. So anybody can take a look at anybody's income information. But, so they don't always supply us their income information on the local level. They'll wait until the County Board of Equalization or maybe even go as far as to the state or circuit court is when they start presenting their income information. In Lincoln County, we did all apartments on an income approach. It's a standardized approach. We took a look at potential rents. We standardized the vacancies. We standardized the expenses based on the year that the apartment complex was constructed. So if we do have any local apartments that have appealed this year, you'll see an income. You'll see the income information.
Okay. And I think that was, I do remember several times where we've suggested, or you've suggested that, hey, if you're not happy with the cost or market approach, that you could come. Do they have that ability to make that switch in between the local board and the county board, or between the county and the state, that they could change their mind in what their argument is of why it's not appraised correctly in their mind?
Yes, when we see the income information is usually beyond even county is when they...
So they try to do it the easy way, and then before having to open up their books and
they usually already, I mean, those commercial properties already know their value based on income. I mean, I have to have this much income to have this much net to make it worth this for me. So they've already got that. They already know that, and that's usually part of their value that they're requesting. Now, how did they get to that value they're requesting? You don't know if it's market cost or income, but it will come out. And 99 out of 100, it's going to be their income that's capitalized to come up with that value they're requesting.
Okay. So. And if I could, Madam Chair, just one more. We kind of did this, or you kind of answered this, but I need the 15-second explanation when someone says, I bought this house for $80,000 and you're telling me that you've assessed it at 100. And, you know, you're right, no one ever comes back when it's lower. And, well, actually they do. We've had a couple that have come back and said, well, do you want us to really appraise it at what the other direction? They think that their purchase price was still low. And I try to use a car analogy that if I'm a good shopper, I can go out and buy a car for less than wholesale value or retail value or trade, you know, when you look at those numbers. But give me that 15-second, I mean, maybe I did it already.
My 15-second is, if we treated them exactly the same, we're assessing them fairly, equally, and it's not an exact science as mass appraisal. We might differ on what we should do, and I know my 15 seconds is up, but you know, what do you do with that $80,000 sale? We let you decide.
Thank you.
We let you decide.
The sidebar is too, that low sale compared to assessment, we need to look at the characteristics of that sale. Was it offered on the open market? Was there a relative involved? There's some criteria there. And if it wasn't offered on the open market, I would bring that to you and say, this was not an open market sale. They probably got a good deal. Because I got 5 other ones over here that says, this is what it's worth. Some people get good deals, some people don't. with that, again, we have to put everybody in a bowl. Not everyone fits. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I've told many people when they come in and I say, I've looked through everything with your house. I can't get there. Our value is right compared to our model. If I was you, I would appeal. If I was in your position, appeal. I just can't get there.
That makes sense. I guess the other is just trying to, you're right, sometimes you get a good deal, sometimes you do better than the market, and it's, oh, I know what it was. If someone has a large increase, that's my other place where we seem to struggle with this, is that they've gotten a good deal for the last 5 years since the last reappraisal, but I don't know how you explain that to someone. Hey, you should have been paying more the last 5 years. No one ever comes in and thanks us for not taxing us for the last 5 years. But now you're where you need to be, or that you're following the model. And you're right, the model may differ a little bit between Lincoln and Minnehaha County. That's the difference between your bosses, that, you know, the taxpayers and the county commissions that do that. If they don't like the assessment, they have a discussion with you on how your model works. So our job is just to say, is this a fair and appraised value, and did we get to it with trained professional people? So thank you. I'm looking forward to it. I may be one of the few that look forward to next week. So
You can have every single shift.
I signed up for every shift, didn't I, Tamara?
Councilor Neitzer.
One of the answers I would give is that, just like when I served on the Board of Adjustment and we had to be careful about when we would grant variances, is to tell people that, you know, there's the other 98 or 99% of people out there that aren't here asking or complaining and asking to be reduced. And so, you know, if this is your fair share, this is your fair share. So if we were just to give it to you because you don't like it, then we run into a major problem. Now, if it's wrong, we need to fix it. But that's the people that don't come and speak are not represented if we do that.
I think Carla's email always had a good quote on the bottom that says, you can't give a break to somebody or a reduction without asking someone else to pay more. And that's the truth of it. Our job is to be fair and equal. So if we're going to give somebody something here, somebody else is going to have to pick up the piece over here. So we really do our jobs with due diligence and try to put forth the best product that we can, the fairest assessment, the most equal and accurate that we can be. Are we perfect? No. Are the processes perfect? No. Is the market perfect? Man, oh man, if it was, I'd have the crystal ball and I wouldn't be standing here right now. But we do our best, and when the best isn't fitting someone else's perception of best, there's steps, and it starts with you folks to correct that. So,
and very good point. The other thing I would point out is, you know, I know it stings when you see a 20% increase, but that's also probably people that for 6 years didn't come in and say, you know, I just don't like, you just have valued me $100,000 less than what it's worth. You know, could you fix that?
We did 6 to 8%. If there is a 20%, it's probably because an error has occurred in the past. Everyone else moved up with the market. There was a board adjustment that got left on a page in a computer program that didn't get caught, and it didn't get caught, and it didn't get caught. And when we find the error, we fix the error. So
my last real question, reappraisals. So that's where you're going in, physically going and you're appraising the home and going in there. How far do you go as far as that goes? Is that a whole neighborhood deal? And let's say you reappraise me and, you know, you raise me $80,000 or whatever, but you didn't happen to get to the houses across the street, because obviously it's got to stop somewhere. And you say, well, and somebody said to you, well, you raised me $80,000, you didn't do anything over here. What is your answer to that?
Sometimes that's a tough answer, but generally if we're going to do a reappraisal, yes, that whole neighborhood is going to get done at one time. There is not, we should never be splitting half of a neighborhood. Now, my neighbor across the street, that could be a problem. That road could be the divider between neighborhood lines. So ultimately you want to do the entire neighborhood. Ideally, you would want to do the entire town or the entire township, or ideally, the entire county at one time. It's not feasibly possible, none of that. So again, we try and do a complete reappraisal of a valued area, and the smallest that would be a neighborhood. So.
Okay, and I'm sorry, one more. So like if you go through and do a market adjustment, 15% up for everybody, Now, everybody starts at a different baseline. If I come to you and say, you did a 15% market adjustment, and now it's popped my value up to whatever, 280 or whatever, and they come in, they show you that, I mean, here's comps, I mean, it's 265. Is that something that a no-brainer to correct, to bring it back down?
Depends on the time of the year. Right now, I could not. Right now, it would have to come to you folks. I could agree with them and say, yes, I agree with you, but I need your blessing to lower that value.
But I mean, would you concur with that at our board if there's
those would be those recommendations that come from our office that yes, hey, yeah, they came to us. It's kind of like your sales. We went out there, we assessed it at 280. We went out there and found out, oh my goodness, their basement flooded. They tore it out. We didn't know about it. Take that basement finish value out. Here it is, 240. We've notified them. They say, yeah, that's exactly what we thought. They don't need to waste their time coming here. We'll just come on their behalf and say, this is our recommendation or our correction that we sent out 280. I need your blessing for me to officially lower it to 240.
Perfect, thanks.
Tom Greco. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Staley, and then Tom has a couple remarks about it as well.
Well, and once again, I know we had this discussion, Councilor Neisert and I did last year, about this whole process, is that these people have a right to be here. They have a right to come up and appeal, and I have said publicly that the people who come with their homework done will be more successful than ones that don't. You know, that will have comparables, and like what you just said, Chris, I mean, there are situations where you don't know all the information. So we need to come at this with an open heart and listening to these people as they speak. But at the end of the day, I mean, whatever the assessment is, people wouldn't be fighting so hard to keep it lower if it didn't mean a increase in their property taxes. I mean, really, earlier you were saying that this is just an innocent little equalization exercise. Well, really, at the end of the day, it does have big ramifications. Chris is shaking his head, yes. So, yes, it does.
Oh, go ahead.
I would just say, I don't think I heard anything that disputed that we shouldn't be listening to these, we shouldn't be looking at the facts. And by the way, that once again, the math is if everybody goes up 5%, nobody's taxes go up and there is no consequence. That's the math.
Thank you. Tom has an update.
And then just real quickly on the scheduling piece, as was mentioned, Mayor's been doing a great job scheduling the Lincoln County ones and the Minnehaha County appeals. And we've been fairly steady, but I will tell you, we're hoping to get out a draft, certainly not final schedule for you tomorrow to get a better idea of what's going on next week. Because we do know right now that we are, because again, the appeals come in through Thursday evening. We do know right now that you're going to be meeting Monday night, Tuesday in the morning, Tuesday in the afternoon. We have items scheduled in those slots. And as of a few hours ago, we just need to get another update. We've had items scheduled Thursday morning. So far that we're aware of, we don't have anything scheduled for Wednesday, but it doesn't mean they will get scheduled in. And, you know, pending a significant increase in the amount of appeals, we may not be meeting on Friday. But again, that's all up in the air until Friday and when the final mail comes in over the weekend. The other thing is just a very quick admin note. If you're going to be sitting on the Lincoln County board here in the chambers, I'd recommend that you bring your laptop with you, and this way we'll be able to take Carla's presentation, get it loaded up, and you can navigate on your own.
Thank you for the update. Appreciate all the scheduling that your office has done for us. Any other questions, comments, anything? Thank you both for being here. We will see you all next week. If counselors have questions, please feel free to reach out this week, and I'm sure you would be happy to entertain those questions. Thank you. Our next item is the Sioux Falls Police 2018 Crime Statistics. Welcome, Chief Burns, as you prepare and get that up there.
Good evening, councilors. Chief Matt Burns, Police Department. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present to you the 2018 crime stats. These are the numbers, but in a more detailed format that we released to the media, if you recall, at the press briefing on February 5th. First, let me say that everything we accomplish in our city, from the most basic call for service all the way to solving a homicide case, is due to the dedication, the focus, and the professionalism of the women and men of our department. Both civilian and sworn, they are working hard on the citizens' behalf 24 hours a day, on weekends, on holidays, and yes, in all weather conditions, to ensure that the city we live in stays safe and secure. I couldn't be more proud of their focus on their duty, the dedication, and the heart for public service they have, because every day they work to leave Sioux Falls a little better than they found it. As you know, 2018 was yet another year of growth for our city. With that, one of our continual challenges keeping up with the city's growth and the service expectations of our citizens. This extends all the way from the city's core to the outer reaches. Yes, almost 80 square miles. A key piece of that is to make sure that our response times to emergency and priority calls are responsible and well managed. I have good news on that front, as our average response times for high priority calls in 2018 is 8 minutes and 22 seconds. So this is from when the call comes into Metro Communications, when that call is processed, and that call is dispatched to the officers, when the officer gets it and arrives on scene. That is 8 minutes and 22 seconds. By way of comparison, the averages for 2017 was 9 minutes and 23 seconds. For 2016, 9 minutes and 17 seconds. For further point of reference, so far in 2019, we are at 8 minutes and 12 seconds, but we have the full year to average out. And of course, we'll continue to monitor that very closely. You see here the finalized numbers that will be printed in our annual report coming up. So in looking at the crime statistics en masse from 2018, a couple takeaways for me are certainly our calls for service continue to increase. This is clearly a function not only of our growth, but some of this is also due to a more precise call tracking afforded to us by our new public safety software. You will further note that homicides were down to 8 in 2018 from a historical high of 10 in 2017. Of note that 8 of our 8 homicides, 4 of them were directly related to drugs and drug activity. Rapes, assaults, robberies, burglaries, stolen vehicles, and larcenies showed modest increases in 2018. However, given our steady population growth, these increases did not appreciably impact the rate of crimes per 1,000 population or the 7-year averages, which we will see in just a little bit. Of further note that vandalisms, frauds, and embezzlements all decreased versus 2017. Another distinct challenge continues to dealing with the use and trafficking of drugs, methamphetamine, opiates, and marijuana in Sioux Falls. We know from our experience that the majority of our crime has a direct nexus to drug use and drug trafficking. Larcenies, such as shoplifting, as well as burglaries of vehicles, businesses, and homes, are common means for those addicted to illegal drugs to acquire the means to support their addictions. Many assaults and robberies of individuals are perpetrated in increasing numbers as dealers and users rip each other off, not only for money, but for product during their illicit transactions. Tragically, we have seen that drug-related violence has accounted for half of our homicide investigations in recent years, and as I previously noted, that was the case in 2018 as well. So how are we combating the drug problem in our city? On the front lines of this effort are the detectives assigned to the Sioux Falls Area Drug Task Force. The members of that task force are made up from detectives from the Sioux Falls Police Department, currently 8, including the 2 narcotics crime unit officers that we recently stood up. Also deputies from the Minnehaha County Sheriff's Office, South Dakota DCI agents, as well as federal agents. In 2018, this task force conducted over 350 distinct operations, of which 105 were search warrants seeking drugs and money from illicit transactions and information to further pursue up the chain those who traffic in those drugs. In 2018, our department team seized a record of just over 56 pounds of methamphetamine. This reflects what we are seeing across the state, that the supply of methamphetamine has never been greater and the price has never been cheaper. In fact, as of today, our department has already seized over 13 pounds of methamphetamine since January 1st and over 3 pounds of cocaine. So as you can see, much work remains. The next slide compares our drug seizure amounts going back to 2009. And as is clearly notable, the trend line for methamphetamine seizures is unmistakable, being the dark column. In regards to traffic enforcement, you will see that total traffic citations were down significantly. A major driver of this was a drastic cut of approximately 46% in our 2018 Office of Highway Safety, or OHS, grant funding versus 2017, where it went down from $350,000 in 2017, which allowed over 5,400 hours of additional target enforcement via our saturation patrols, to $188,000 in 2018, which allowed for just over 3,000 hours of saturation patrols and targeted enforcement. This reduction of 2,400 hours had a big impact on our ability to enforce these traffic laws. This cut was done at the federal level, of course, and we had no control over that. Additionally, continued pressure to staff the increasing numbers of special events in our city cuts into our traffic enforcement ability as well. Moving on to clearance rates. This next slide shows that our clearance rates across our major crime categories continue to outpace the national averages significantly. This has historically been the case for our department and is a fact that we take great pride in. A good number of our crimes in our city are solved by our uniformed patrol officers with probable cause arrests at the time of the crime. Also, as is evidenced by our recent cold case homicide success and the record drug seizures numbers over the last years, the detectives assigned to our investigative services division are very good at what they do. This is truly a team effort and amounts to clearance rates, as you can see, that are very strong. So a word about the overall crime rate. In conclusion, despite the obvious challenges we face with narcotics, there is encouraging news in regards to the overall rate of crime in Sioux Falls. That is, property and violent crime rates remain very flat in our city. The 2018 property crime rate of just over 34 crimes per 1,000 population is virtually identical to what it was in 2012 and only 0.06 above the 7-year average. The 2018 violent crime rate of 4.5 crimes per 1,000 population is virtually identical to what it was in 2014 and only 0.04 above the 7-year average. Historically, these rates do fluctuate within a small range in our city, but the facts are they are stable. That they are stable is encouraging given our continuing population growth and previously noted narcotics concerns. What this all tells me and what I would like to impart to you is that yes, Sioux Falls does remain a very safe city to live and to work and to raise our families and to pursue, as we like, all the dreams that we have for us and our kids. We clearly understand what challenges are before us and what are present, but they remain quite manageable. Going forward, I believe that our department is very well managed to maintain that. Again, thank you for your time today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Chief. Any comments, questions? Councilor Neitzer?
Do you know how your, thank you, Chief, do you know how your 822 response time for high priority measures up to other departments?
So if you look nationally, and that's a great question, thank you for asking. If you look nationally, when it comes to priority and emergency calls, a lot of departments across the country, depending on size, but roughly our size, are in that 10-minute range. So we have historically tracked favorably towards that rate. But as I noted earlier, that's something that we keep very close track of. That is one of our key metrics that we measure when we come before you and during budget time and as a part of our FTE asks, because we want to make sure that we're maintaining that. And though we are a partner in that response time gambit, so Metro Communications has a big piece of that as well, to get that call in, get it processed, and get it out to us in time. As you can see over time, they're maintaining a good range with that, but that, of course, is a metric that they want to manage closely as well.
Okay, good. Looking at the drug seizures, the numbers are so all over the map in given years, and I'm assuming that might be just, you know, maybe one outlier, huge bust in a given year or not. Are there better metrics to get a handle on where the trend of you know, drug use and drug crime? Because it just seems like the numbers are so all over the place. It's hard to, you know, look at a number that goes from 5,000 in one year to 25,000 in the next year and necessarily be able to say that, you know, that methamphetamines are up 500%. I mean, that may not be true. What, do you look at other metrics?
Yes, we do. In fact, we look at the number of cases that our detectives investigate. We look at the number of arrests for not only the possession of controlled substance, possession of marijuana, but also the trafficking arrests. So there are a number of metrics that we do track. In fact, much of our drug task force is funded by the HIDA grant, the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Grant, and we are required to keep very detailed and numerous statistics to support that grant funding. Also, some of the things you look at is the number of overdoses that you have in your community, the ones that come to our attention. And so we track those very closely and also monitor the overdose deaths, which I think we were in the range 16 or so overdose deaths for all drugs in Sioux Falls last year. Also, we get some input from the medical community about that, and we are working on a way to try to get information from the hospitals, the emergency departments, totally de-identified, but to give us a better sense of how many of those overdose cases are coming into the EDs in our city that we never see.
Very good.
Yeah, and that gives you a much better sense of your overall drug problem.
Okay, very good. Is there anything that can be done, and I see the number fluctuates a little bit, to get the arson clearance rate up? It looks like that's the one that's maybe kind of on the lower end, and maybe there's so few here that the numbers can, you know, it might only take 1 or 2 cases for it to, you know, but.
Yeah, we don't see a lot of arson, so it can fluctuate pretty rapidly on the numbers, and that's kind of a function of what's the evidence at the scene. Those arson cases can be kind of tough to crack because much of your evidence, by the nature of things, kind of burns up. But I appreciate the question.
And finally, I was at the press conference with the announcement. It was a very proud moment for the department and the city, so congratulations.
Yes, thank you very much.
Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief Burns. I think one of my questions, Councilor Neitzer touched on it already. The drug seizures, are all those big numbers that go from one high number to a low or low to a high, is that generally usually because there's been one particular incident or one big bust? Like I think you talked about the one with the meth, but generally does it come down to one?
Yeah, and that's the thing with drug investigations. You get one big bust, and it can throw off your numbers tremendously. So, for an example, in 2018, even though our numbers were at record levels, over 56 pounds of methamphetamine, overall the state numbers were reduced by a fair margin because in 2017 they had a huge meth bust out in Pennington County that was coming through. The Highway Patrol got it. So overall, that skewed the state numbers tremendously. And also the nature of drug investigations is it's hard to always know or determine where you're going to pick off, you know, in the process. Like one seizure, you may get quite a bit of money because that was the timing of the cycle where the search warrant was conducted on that residence or that apartment. Whereas another time, you know, they had more supply there of the product. So it's a moving target in a sense, but drug investigation seizures kind of can be all over the map.
What happens to funds that are seized and things like that?
Right, so there's a state drug fund that the seizures generally most of the time go to that state drug fund, and then that supports law enforcement operations across the state, and it's administered through the Division of Criminal Investigation. So when we have a large seizure or any of our seizure monies, typically they will go to that fund, and then we're able to access some of those back to help support our operations, be it equipment or maybe a canine and things like that.
How much in funds did we take in last year through drug seizures, just in Sioux Falls?
You know, I'm fairly confident, I don't have that right in front of me, I'm fairly confident it was over 100,000, but I can get that for you.
Okay. And then, I remember last year when we talked about this, and it was just really encouraging, you know, all the different crime statistics, I think virtually every one went down, and I think that's kind of out of the ordinary. Why was it again? And I mean, you hate to see any of these stats increase, but I think that is obviously a byproduct of our growth. It's going to naturally happen, and I think percentage-wise you're saying it is kind of fitting within, you hate to say expected, but kind of the expected maybe increases overall. But what was special about or different about last year again? When you look at everything basically went down, and this year we're kind of back to going up like it did before.
To me, we know that these statistics are cyclical. So crime goes up and crime goes down, and it never really stays in a static pattern. But one of the reasons that 2017 was more of a down year is because 2016 was such an up year. So if you go back to 2016, we had numbers that frankly, if they would have continued on that path, I would have really been pulling my hair out, because that was an unsustainable pace. But then they really leveled off in 17. So it's almost like in 18 they're coming back to more of a mean, more of a norm. But it is difficult to expect crime rates and specific numbers of crime to decrease as your population grows by 4,000 a year. So my main takeaway, and as I offered earlier, I'm very encouraged by the fact that our crime rates are very, very flat and remaining stable despite the concerns we have with narcotic crime in our community and the growing population.
Okay, and one more, if I might. Two just curiosity questions that hit me. What are examples when you see fraud? Can you give an example? What falls under that? And then my other one that I saw, that again, just for if no proof of insurance, if somebody gets pulled over and they don't have proof of insurance, I mean, a lot of times I'm assuming you find that out, they have an accident, maybe they can't drive anyway, but if you get pulled over for speeding or something, you don't have proof of insurance, do you get hauled off, or the car gets, what happens then?
No, so we don't tow vehicles for no proof of insurance unless there's an accident or something and it's just not, able to continue. So with a no proof of insurance ticket, you're actually written a citation, but if you take your proof of insurance to the clerk of courts prior to the court date is written on the ticket, then the ticket gets dismissed.
Okay, yeah, I'm always amazed how high that number
prove that
is.
you had insurance on the date that the citation was written, not the week after.
Okay. I think the other one I asked just quickly about fraud. What falls under that?
So fraud could be anything from a insufficient funds check to an identity theft case to a credit card. Somebody maybe got a hold of your credit card number. It could be theft by deception. So there's a number of things that would fall into that fraud category.
Okay. Well, thanks to you and your team for your hard work. Appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Councilor Sol.
Thank you, Madam
Sam.
Chair. I have two questions, Chief Burns. Occasionally we have, during public input, we have citizens trying to impress upon us that certain parts of the city have become a lot of crime in those areas, and other parts of the city is pristine. Could you address the parts of the city that crime seems to be going up?
You know what, it is a reality in any city, frankly, any city of our size certainly, that there are certain areas of town that are more mature, that have just a different dynamic than other parts of town. That's not a shock to anybody in this room. We do see different types of crime across different parts of the city. So the expectation that there shouldn't be different types of crime or dynamics in different communities, to me, is just not accurate. So the reality is, when we do see patterns like that in those neighborhoods, we handle that differently. We have different numbers of officers assigned to those areas. If we know there's going to be a higher call volume, if we know there's a specific type of crime that's occurring at a higher rate in an area than versus another, then we will, address that and maybe have an unmarked unit doing some surveillance. If we think that perhaps, for an example, if there's a series of car hopping or car burglaries that are occurring. So there's any number of ways that in law enforcement that we can address and kind of attack, if you will, those problems, but it's subjective to an area. So if we're seeing more of it, then we'll address it more aggressively.
Thank you. And then my last question is, last year, the new mayor at that time, Paul Tenaiken, and you addressed that you were reassigning a few officers to take a different task to go after drugs. Could you give us an update on how that's worked out?
Yes. So that would be the narcotics crime unit. We have 2 officers assigned in that role, and they are actually part of our Sioux Falls Drug Task Force. They have just a slightly different role. Their role is more to address the street level crime that impacts more directly the quality of life in a neighborhood. So if you have a neighbor, or you see in your neighborhood a lot of short-term traffic, a lot of people that you don't normally see that vehicle or a series of vehicles, they don't live there. Those could be some indicators of drug activity of a residence. Those are the kind of complaints that we would take in. The narcotics crime unit would then address, and then they can do surveillance on that. They can do research, maybe see who those vehicles are registered to, and investigate that and try to get to the level where, if they have probable cause to believe that is drug activity, or if they, through some investigatory means, confirm that, then they can get a search warrant on that residence and see, in fact, if there is drugs being used, trafficked out of that house, and remove the problem, if you will, or work to remove the problem and improve the quality of life in that neighborhood.
Just to follow up on that, so in the short time that you've had that, do you deem that it's been successful, or is it a work in progress? Where would you be at in that?
Thank you. I think it's been quite successful because it's actually done, another intent was to kind of free up some of the detectives on the drug task force to focus on the more intense or higher level DTOs or drug trafficking organizations and they're able to do that, which is kind of evidenced by some of the figures that we've seen the past year. There was a training time to get those new detectives up to speed, so they did spend some time in some training, but the reports I've seen that they are well engaged in those efforts and they're meeting success.
Councilor Starr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, I want to follow up on Councilor Sale made a great point that that crime does move around the city. But back in October, I know I had worked a little bit with the mayor's chief of staff, Erica Beck, and she had pulled some numbers for me for a square block, because that's probably the easiest way to do it, between 11th and 12th Street and Duluth and Summit. And she went back to 2016, and in that one block area, or that square block area, in 2016, there were 1,296 calls for service. In 2017, there were 1,407 calls for service. And in 2018, up until when the numbers were pulled in October, there were already 900. And I would suspect that it's easily over 1,000 again in that one square block. I feel that you need our help in enforcement more than just the things that you can do to clean up that area. Whether it's planning and zoning issues, whether it's the other crime that's going on, would you think that if we pulled these numbers for other blocks, we'd find similar numbers in that high of concentration in that one square block?
I would believe that those would be some of the highest numbers in our city. Probably another number inside those numbers, which is not easily reflected, is how many of those are officer-initiated calls. So that has been an area where we have targeted more manpower because of some of the citizen complaints we've had in that area. We just know that that's a challenged area for our city, and so when you assign officers to details in those areas, then they are actually initiating and creating calls themselves that aren't initiated by citizens. That does inflate those numbers a little bit, but irrespective of that, Councilor, that is an area of higher calls for service in our city, and it has been for some time.
Well, it does break, I guess I could go deeper into it, and without, I apologize, I should have had this available so we could break it down, but it looks, over those 3 years, it's about 1/3 of the calls are officer-initiated calls versus 911 or other phone calls, or the fire department initiated, or even other in a couple of them that it breaks those out. But it looks like about 1/3, so there is that enforcement. I guess my overall question is, you have a property owner who owns that block who seems to be part of the problem. That we wouldn't allow this anywhere else in our city, and I guess I'm looking for help. Is there zoning? Is there some other approach that, obviously the officer-initiated calls, I mean, the numbers are matching year after year. We're not able to clean it up at this point. And there's some bad things that happen in that area. And if we continue to do the same thing, I would suspect in 19, we're going to match the same numbers. So at some point, this responsibility falls on the property owner, that they're creating a nuisance, and I don't know the legal definitions, and I'm out on a ledge before I get too far in how I accuse them of it, and I think it's pretty publicly known what group owns it. And the reason that they own it is because they make a lot of money renting it out. You know, there are some zoning issues that I think would, in the storage units, that would clean some of this up. I know there's been some talks with the property owner, and they flat out said that, hey, we make a lot of money here. Of course we're not going to clean it up. Well, of course we're not going to clean it up, but we're not doing anything different because we're making a lot of money. That was their comments. So I'm asking, I guess, more than anything, is there something that we can do via ordinance to help your department so that there aren't as many officer-initiated calls, Or where is the next step? When do we decide that we finally had enough and it needs to be labeled a nuisance? And I'm sure there's some legal ramifications to that.
Well, let me speak to that generally. I know from my experience that the police department cannot fix every problem. So when you're speaking about things that require a zoning change, or where there are zoning issues or problems or complaints by neighbors, that's something that we can take note of and pass on to the other city departments, and we frankly have quite often. We work closely with planning on that, and Matt Tobias in the past, to try to affect change in neighborhoods. That if there's a big enough problem, it is best handled by a collaborative effort between city departments. There's no doubt about that. I can tell you that in my career, and certainly since on the street, and certainly since then, we have had a lot of challenging relationships with renters, with landlords and things like that. They not all hold themselves to the same level of accountability as others, and so there are good ones and frankly some not so good ones. So that is, you're very correct to raise that point, and I'm more than willing to work with any city department on making effective and real change, and so we can reduce those call numbers. There's nothing I would like more to be able to spread out my manpower and the time that they spend out there on other proactive things other than a continually challenged area of the city.
Thank you. If I could, Madam Chair, if I could toss one more out. I was interested in the comment that you made about special event staffing. Would it be your plan that maybe some of that could be handled? I'm trying to find the right way of, more entry-level staff where it doesn't take your experienced officers, whether it's your cadets or the other type of programs that you have for some of those crowd things. And I think that's one of the things that makes Sioux Falls great, is the number of special events that we have. We all enjoy that as part of our quality of life. But if we're balancing special events with traffic enforcement and lack of grant money, from a policy side, I'm trying to balance that with where you think that we need to head in those type of things. Because I do see the same things with the DUI arrest, the amount of time that takes several of your officers off the street for 4 or 6 hours by the time they get that process. So a special event staffing takes those additional officers off the street, and we have to balance some of that. And if that's the special events paying for part of it, or if we need to supplement your budget in a different way to make that, to get back into the traffic enforcement, because I think that is the other thing we talk about in Sioux Falls, is the driving ability of maybe some of our guests, because it wouldn't be our residents that have challenging driving styles that would cut people off and do those things. So is that something you're taking a look at, and is there something different that we need to start handling in a different way with special events?
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, it's something we are taking a close look at. In fact, we are looking at a potential ordinance change that would allow us to be able to charge more of the people that hold the events, the event organizers, for the services that we give. So right now, we're not allowed to do any of that under the current ordinance. And so what that causes a situation where our traffic officers and frankly many of our SROs who work these events as well, school resource officers, are having to flex their time during the week so that they can work these events on the weekends. Well, not only are you taking traffic officers off the street who are enforcing the traffic laws and DWIs and speeding and any manner of moving violations, you're taking SROs out of the schools where that's the whole idea, is to have them there. So in lieu of just adding to our overtime budget, so we're able to pay for these events out of our overtime budget, my advocacy would be towards an ordinance change that allows us to pass on some of these costs to the event organizers. Frankly, that's the norm across certainly the Midwest and the nation. And we have the organizers coming in from these outside events, and they're frankly surprised, many of them, that we don't do something like that, and they're not required to pay for some of the services that our officers give.
I think that's going to be an interesting policy discussion for this group by the time we're done. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilor Staley.
So you're talking about an event like President Trump coming for Kristi Noem's fundraiser, perhaps?
Well, I was talking about the normally scheduled events that we have every year that are already on the schedule.
But that could catch, that wasn't an extra events, different kind of event schedule, right? I mean, that could fall under that ordinance.
I suppose it could if this body deemed
No,
it
I mean,
that it would.
I think a lot of people in our community would be grateful to have you sponsor an ordinance that would address that. Last year, Councilor Starr and I took a little walk around in that neighborhood he was just referencing, the high crime area. And, you know, we came across this gas station over there off Minnesota Avenue, and the people in the gas station are telling us that there's this drug house that is so notorious that they have to close their gas station early because of this drug house. And I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, wow, this is just bizarre. And I'm talking to different people within the law enforcement, and it's like, yes, it's true. This place has a horrible reputation, and we went around and talked to different neighbors, and we went at night, and people are saying, yes, this is really a problematic place. And my mother got sick, but before that happened, I had planned to have a neighborhood picnic in that area and bring the neighbors together, because it comes back to that neighborhood watch effort or the association effort, where you've got neighbors coming together that care about each other. And I think that is just a fabulous deterrent to these things taking root within an area where we're not going to put up with this. We care about you, but we don't want that kind of activity in our community. So I was wondering, how is the Neighborhood Watch program doing? Is that still alive and well?
Absolutely. The Neighborhood Watch program boasts over 50 separate groups in our city. It's a robust program, and we frankly are trying to recruit more folks into that all the time. It's very, very valuable, as we've discussed in the past, Counselor, to have people who are invested in their neighborhoods, who care, who are able to see what's the normal course of events and who's normally in their neighborhood and who's not. And if they sense that something's out of place, if they see something, then they need to report that to us, discuss it amongst the neighbors, and bring that to the attention of law enforcement. We will certainly give that the attention that's due.
Well, and it would be like in this area, I wanted to have this big picnic, and I'm still planning to do it next year, and have it in this apartment, the alleyway there. And I said, I'll provide the food, the chicken, and everybody can bring something, renters, whoever. Let's get together, and it'd be like shining a big flashlight right into the property of this notorious drug house, but also is sending a message to everybody there that, you know, we're here, this is who we are, we care about each other. As we grow as a city, one of the challenges is we don't know our neighbors so often. It's a transient situation, and people just become real isolated and focused on, you know, their own little lives. So I think that's going to be a great thing to do moving forward. For me, that's a mission I have with that neighborhood. But the other thing I would like for next year, and maybe we could even do it this year, I think it would be helpful to have a map of our city and have some kind of a graphic that you're going to say, this is the high level intensity crime, or maybe a marking so that we can say, yeah, this part of town has this problem. This part of town, like over there, I know there were some apartments. Well, there's different apartment complexes. Where are the highest number of police calls, perhaps? Maybe that would be a starting point. Not that I want to tell people coming to town, well, look at the map and don't buy a house in this area. But I think it's going to help us get a grasp on, as a council, you know, where the problems are.
I appreciate that, and I would point out to the council and to the public, we currently have a interactive map on our website, right in the police department, that you can go back 6 months and has a great deal of functionality, and you can pick out different layers and see what kind of crime is going on in any neighborhood in the city.
One more question, if I could say, on the heroin issue here, tell me, on 2018, this 3,000, what is that? What measurement is you got 139.85 in 2017, and then this 3,000.
So that's in grams, and so in order to get to pounds, you take that number divided by 28. So there's 28 grams per ounce, and that gives you ounces, and then 16 ounces to a pound. So what that equates to, Counselor, is about 8.5 pounds of heroin that we seized in 2018.
And that's quite a bit. Was that like one big?
That's a good.
That was one incident, though. Was
Pardon?
that one in? Because it's really up from before. Was there like a real big
No, that's across several seizures. We're seeing the amount of heroin in our city increase.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, that's the case in several cities as you see more heroin and fentanyl becoming more popular in the cities. That's why you're seeing more overdoses, and we're seeing those here. They're still not out of control, but we're working very hard to make sure we have reporting mechanisms in place to inform us so we can appropriately put the resources where they're needed.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chief? Councilor Neitzert?
I guess I have a couple more regarding this. I was aware of the special events discussion. I know there's a lot of marathons and concerts and all these things that go on week to week. And Councilor Starr asked most of the questions about how that's accounted for, and you mentioned that they have to flex time, which is what I assume they would have to do. The fee discussion will be really interesting because I think there's some pros and cons to that. A couple of years ago, my last question, a couple of years ago, I know her name, but I'm not going to say it because I believe she's left the department, but you appointed somebody that was going to be, I don't remember if it was like a community reach out officer that was going to work with a young lady that was going to work with kind of, the minority community and things like that. Assuming that she has left the department, which I think she has that position been filled? Are you going in the same direction, or have you changed your thought process on that particular lane, I guess?
Right. Thank you for asking that. In fact, we have 2 community resource officers now, so the program has actually expanded. So I have plans to actually expand that to have 1 in every quadrant of the city. That's been a very, very positive program for us. The amount of outreach that we're able to do, not only to every community of the city, but specifically the ethnic communities and some of our smaller groups in our city has just been incredible. Those CROs are working a lot of hours after normal business hours during the week and on the weekends to make sure that Sioux Falls PD is well represented in those groups and that they understand. Our philosophy is that we are the police department for every community in our city, and we want them to make sure that they have a positive relationship with us and can reach out to us for any reason and not feel like that they're left out or marginalized in any way.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you.
Councilor Starr?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Get one more quick one, Chief. I didn't realize we were going to grill you quite this hard this afternoon when we were just talking about statistics, but I had a constituent ask me the other day about what happens in a traffic accident. Do we still take traffic statements or a report, or how does that work if someone's involved in an auto accident?
So there's state reportable accidents, which that's a certain level of damage that it's a state reportable accident, or any injury is a state reportable accident. Below those damage levels, or if there's no injury, we still have a local accident form that we can fill out. Typically on some of the minor accidents, we'll just have the participants exchange information. The officer will ensure that there is proof of insurance, issue any citations that are appropriately in that regard. But we do want to make sure that we are having a good customer service in regards to accidents. Also hand out the red tags, which are required if there's any damage. Do we track that, the number of auto accidents and those type of things, or is there a trend, I guess, overall of what you're seeing? Is there more based on the population going up, or I missed that? Yeah, as our population increases, yes, certainly we have more accidents. You can see the total number of motor vehicle accidents increased by over 400 from 2017 to 2018. And also, accidents are also a function of the size of our MSA. So the 270,000, probably close to that, citizens in our metropolitan statistical area who are coming into Sioux Falls on a regular basis for health care, for jobs, for entertainment, also contributes to our traffic counts and accidents.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have a few otherwise. So a couple questions for you, Chief, if I can. If there are tips on a drug house, what should we as a council or any citizens do for that? I know it was mentioned today that there is a very well-known drug house. It's very possible that you may or may not know about it, and so what should we do as a citizenry to to report those?
Well, there's a number of ways to contact us. Certainly the standard way is the front desk telephone number. A person can walk in and report that to our front desk. They can report that through the city's CRM system. So again, there's numerous ways to get that information to our department. That information will get funneled to our detectives, specifically our narcotics crime unit, and be assigned, frankly, appropriately given the information.
And any additional information that you have as far as license plate numbers, the activity or anything like that is probably helpful too, right?
Yes, any and all information can help support an investigation.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure we had that. My other couple of questions I have is, over the years we've made some changes to Marcy's Law. How have you seen an impact with your department as far as sharing information, and how are those changes with Marcy's Law impacted you as a whole?
Well, as you know, right after Marcy's Law was originally implemented, we really kind of limited the amount of information that we gave, because in the immediate aftermath of Marcy's Law, there was just a lot of I guess agencies just weren't sure what they could release, and they certainly didn't want to release something and be, taken to task for a constitutional rights violation because it was put into the Constitution. So since then, the legislature's seen fit to make that where victims have to opt in. So now they have to tell us that they don't want their information released, whereas before you just couldn't release it. So that's been actually very helpful, and frankly, I think it makes more sense. We want to be transparent with that to the extent appropriate, given victims' rights and privacy concerns, but we also want to be transparent with our reporting to the media, to the citizens, and to, frankly, people who operate, apartment buildings and rental properties. We want to be, as transparent as possible, but in fact, we have to be accountable to the law as well.
Right, thank you. And then two other quick ones. As we know, the legislature is wrapping up. Some of the bills have not been signed or fully gone through the system yet, if you will. Any changes that impact your department or make it more difficult or easier for you all to do your job as far as some of those changes? I know there was a lot of gun bills this year, as well as just other reporting requirements along there too. So anything that, just at a high level, that you can share with us?
Well, it was an interesting session, certainly. It kind of remains to be seen on several of those bills and see how the practical application of them. It could make it more interesting across the state, especially at a rally time for our peers West River, when it comes to having anybody can have a concealed weapon on them, regardless whether they're a state resident or not. So I look to that time and to kind of see what the results come from that. There are some amendments, a law that it was, I believe, House Bill 1056, which was kind of, for lack of a better term, aimed directly at our own city ordinance on regulating pawn shops and secondhand goods businesses. There was a statement read into the law where it's not intended to change any business practices, and so we're operating under the assumption that we're able to operate under our city ordinance as constructed. We'll see if the proponents of that, how that plays out. But that does give me some concerns, because obviously we had very legitimate reasons for constructing that ordinance back in 2011. I stood at this very podium then as a sergeant advocating for those changes, and I firmly believe in them. But we are all subject to the laws of the state, and so we will see how that plays out.
Thank you for the update. And then my last thing, I guess, not necessarily a question, but more of a plug, is 6 of the 8 counselors were here as we've made changes to some budgetary items as far as drug prevention. We have not seen that put back into our budget, and so for me personally, I don't want to speak for the rest of the council, but for me personally, that's certainly a priority, a budgetary priority, as well as, these numbers fluctuate for many different reasons, but without having some sort of drug prevention connected to it, whether it's for youth drug prevention and or adult, and partnered with the triage center, for me, that's just something that speaks volumes. And so I would hope that as we move forward as a state and a city, that we can make prevention really a priority in this community. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you for your presentation. Anything else from the rest of the council? Seeing none, we'll move into I have the wrong agenda in front of me, sorry. We'll move into public comment. Any public comment on the 2 presentations that were before you today? Seeing none, we will adjourn this meeting. We do have a land use that will start in approximately 10, 12 minutes. So with that, we will adjourn this informational meeting. Stick around for the land use. Thank you.